As always, this webinar is presented by Noble Credit Union, our good friends and partners at Noble. Is there somebody, again, I apologize because my screen looks a little different this time. Do we have somebody with Noble on
Hello,
with?
can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes. Thank you, Daryl.
Hi. So my name's Daryl Schilling. I'm the Business Development Manager with Noble Credit Union. I just wanted to take a second to thank the Fresno Chamber for putting this event on. At Noble, we have a huge value in learning and supporting our business partners, and this event definitely checks all of those boxes. I did want to take a second to make sure that everybody knows that if you are interested in becoming a business partner with Noble Credit Union, what that looks like is that we would support your staff by making sure that they had access to credit union products and services in order to make sure that they are financially able to handle all the stressors that might come from life these days. And so if anybody is interested in that, I would love to be in contact with you. But I'll turn it back over to you guys to get this show off the ground.
Thank you very much. Again, our format here is you can ask questions throughout on the chat function, and we'll do some live questions at the end. And again, with no further ado, thank you very much, Mr. Littman. The floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. As everyone knows, there are some great things about technology and there are some bad things about technology. So it's good because we can all be at our own spots in our own offices doing presentations like this. It's bad because sometimes it's hard to log in and things like that. And you may have a little technical difficulties at the beginning, but we're good. I'm going to share a presentation right now, and we'll go through it. Like Scott said, you can raise your hand at any point. You can ask questions in the chat. I will answer them. We'll also try to save some time at the end for more questions. I will have the presentation available, so if anybody wants it. And then one thing I also have handy is our law firm's own policy that we're going to be talking about, because there's certain points in the law where it's, even as a lawyer, it's confusing as to what this is talking about when it says your plan has to have XYZ. So at some point, what I'll do is I'll say, hey, look, this is what our policy says, and this is how we implemented it, and this is how we are doing it. And I think it'll make more sense in those terms. So I will share my screen and share our presentation. All right, so get compliant with the Workplace Violence Prevention Plan. So this is all new from Cal OSHA. July 1st, 2024, employers have been required to create a policy like this. As you'll see in one of these slides, unlike a lot of areas in the law, whether it applies to you depends on the size of your company. So for example, like the FMLA, certain types of leave, you have to have 50 employees. And if you don't, you can ignore it. Other laws, you could have 5. Some are 15, some are 25. What's a little bit different about this one, if you look at what the law says, it says all employers unless you're exempt under this labor code section. And so it doesn't set forth a requirement of you have to have a certain amount of employees. So the way I read it is it applies to everyone unless you fit into one of these very specific exemptions. And so the plan would be, if you have a company, if you're an employer, then you must have a plan like this. Now, the good news is at the very end, the last slide, Cal OSHA has made it really easy for employers. They have, if you go to their website, and what we did is we pasted the link on the very last page, takes you directly to the link, and it'll take you to a Word document where you could essentially use that Word document and fill it in to fit your own business needs. So that's what we did. That's what we recommend. Why reinvent the wheel if you don't have to? Why come up with something that you don't know whether it's going to be compliant or not? You know, it's Cal OSHA who's having employers do this. So you can use their template, fill it in, and then as you'll kind of see, what we'll talk about is, you know, we listed our office manager as the point of contact for certain things, and you may want to list your office manager, or depending on the kind of company, you may not have an office manager. So it may be the person at the front desk. So you can really just tweak it to whatever your company need is. So workplace violence affects nearly 2 million Americans working annually. So I know this is true because as an employment lawyer, we do civil litigation and we deal with all sorts of issues in the workplace. So I was thinking about some examples because that seems like a lot. It seems like a lot to say 2 million people are impacted in some way by workplace violence in the workplace. And then I started thinking about some of the cases that we have. Active litigation cases where two dairy guys got into a fist fight at work. Active litigation cases where people working at a cell phone store got into a verbal altercation with the customer and called the property management company to have them escorted out. And you'll see as we go through the definitions, you can have, you know, your normal physical violence, and you could have threats. So all of these types of things are things that I'm actually seeing in our practice, and it can be between coworker to coworker, coworker to supervisor, depending on the nature of the company. It could be with a customer, it could be with a vendor. And so any of those types of situations is going to be applicable here. So really we're looking at, okay, what does the plan have to say? What should the plan say? And what does it mean? So if we're doing things right and we already have one in place, how do we interpret the terms, and how do we make sure that what we're doing within our own policy is correct in the eyes of the law? So this is how this came about. There was a SB 553, which was signed last September. And what it did is it changed and added a labor code section. So 6401.7. The new code section is 6401.9, and it sets forth all of the legal requirements that Cal OSHA says employers must have present in these plans. So it requires employers to develop and implement a workplace violence prevention plan. And then it tells us what an employer is. So an employer can include a federal agency, a state agency, a city, county, district. Most likely for us present here, it's going to be a private or public company. This could be corporations or any public agency. So very broad definition of who an employer is. And as I said at the beginning, it doesn't have the qualifiers to say, okay, well, this applies to employers with 25 or more people. So it's a little tricky because how are you going to put this plan in place if you only have 5 employees? You know, you have to figure out, who are we going to report it to? Who do we want to be that point person? So you'll see if you don't already have one in place, you go to the model from OSHA, and then you just plug the name in of the person who's going to investigate, who's going to be the one if an issue comes up that you're going to report it to. So all those sorts of things, you're going to have to think through who you want it to be, who's best suited in that position or in that role for your company. So there's also a training requirement under this law. So it says training employees on workplace violence. So employers must provide effective training, and that includes initial training to start it off and annually thereafter. So this training is also a little different than some of the other aspects of the law. So for example, many of you might be supervisors or managers or maybe not. But we all know if we've been employed anywhere for a certain length of time that you have to do anti-harassment training. And if you're a supervisor, you do 2 hours. If you're a non-supervisor, you do 1 hour. This law does not have any of those sorts of requirements. So it doesn't say the training has to be conducted in this manner. It has to be 1 hour long. It has to be 2 hour long. It's very vague. So there's no real right or wrong answer. You can do training in different ways, but my advice would be, make sure that everyone at your company has the plan. So for example, I know we emailed it out to everybody. We let people know, hey, look, here's our plan that's going into place. If you want a copy, there's a physical copy in our office manager's office. If at any point you want to see it, you can go ask, no problem. We also have one saved on our online drive. So these are the ways that you can access it. And if you have any questions, this is who you need to talk to. And then in terms of training, just making sure that people know exactly what the plan is, have gone through it, what to do if they have any questions. It really can be informal, but it's just important for employees to know that this plan is in place and what exactly the plan is saying. So if God forbid something happens in the workplace and there's some sort of violence, people know exactly who they're supposed to call, what to do. And then from an employer standpoint, we're doing everything that's necessary under the law. So as we'll see later on, there's a very specific log that you have to report. Where did this happen? Who was involved? Things like that. And then also what we'll talk about is how long we need to keep these records in case there's an audit, or if OSHA or somebody else, some other entity comes and wants to see what records we've maintained. So training, not only do you have to do it initially, but it is supposed to be annually, not defined, but to just let people know, look, it's either the same as it was before, or we've made certain changes, and this is what the policy now says. Employee materials should be easy to understand and match the worker's education, reading skills, and language. That shouldn't be a problem. As you'll see, the OSHA example is pretty easy. It's in plain language. So any types of employees should be able to understand exactly what's being said. So in effect at all times and in all work areas, and be specific to the hazards and corrective measures for each work area and operation. And finally, may be incorporated as a standalone section in the written injury and illness prevention program. So if you have an IIEP, you can do it that way. You can incorporate this policy into your IIEP policy, or you can do what we did. You can implement and adopt its own policy. I think ours is 12 or 13 pages. And it's a standalone document, kind of aside from the employee handbook, aside from different policies. It's just by itself, has everything that's required in it, is accessible to people. And so at least as of this point, we are compliant with the new law. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is the actual labor code that pertains to the workplace violence prevention plan. So it's Labor Code section 6401.9. So these are the requirements that the plan says. So when you have your written plan, it must include these types of terms. So you have to identify the names of the persons responsible for its implementation. So for that, we have one of my partners, Paul Bauer, is in charge. and our office manager is also in charge. So everyone at our law firm knows if something happens, you are to go talk immediately to Mr. Bauer or our office manager. So, like I mentioned, that can be whomever your company decides is the correct point person. There's no qualification, so it doesn't have to be anyone specific. You can pick as long as that person is familiar and able to assist with any of these types of requirements. So then 2, effective procedures for employee involvement in developing and implementing the plan. 3, methods to coordinate implementation of the plan with other employees when applicable. 4, procedures for employers to handle and respond to reports of workplace violence while ensuring no retaliation against the reporting employee. So we'll stop at that one because a lot of the purpose of this policy is the law really, really, really wants people to be able to report these types of issues. So any types of violence, it doesn't have to be, obviously, if there's, a customer or a vendor comes in and is being physical and grabbing someone or shoving, any of those types of things are going to be applicable, but it can really be, if there's a physical threat or if somebody comes in and they're making someone feel uncomfortable where there's a highly potential violence. All of those things are applicable and they're all supposed to be covered in these plans. And the law wants it to be reported. The law wants people to know so that it can be prevented. So the procedures for employers to handle, it's okay, who are they going to tell and what's going to happen once they tell? So there's a slide later on that talks about, okay, this is the proper investigation. It's similar to some of the other aspects of the law in terms of who's the victim, who are our witnesses, who can we get statements from. So those sorts of things are the same. And then as with any type of the law, just ensuring people that, look, you're not going to be retaliated against. We want you to report it. We're happy you reported it. We don't want violence in the workplace, and we want to either prevent it or handle the situation accordingly and go from there. So procedures to ensure compliance from employees, including supervisors, procedures to communicate with employees regarding workplace violence matters. So our firm, we have an investigation team. So we have certain people who are going to conduct interviews. We are going to let the people know who will report this that, look, there's confidentiality. So as with any other type of workplace complaint or issue, to the best extent possible, we're going to keep whatever you tell us confidential. Now, look, if we need to talk to other people, then, some people are going to have to know, but there's still going to be an aspect of confidentiality. Depending on if you have video surveillance in the workplace, that would be something. If there's a report and they say something happened, it would be a good idea to check the cameras, check the surveillance cameras, see, okay, is what is being reported, is it matching up with what we can see on our cameras? And if so, who else was around? Who do we need to talk to? How can we what evidence is there? Help document things like, what was the cause of the incident? So was it this person who started it, who instigated it? Is there any level of self-defense at issue? And then, as with any investigation, taking corrective actions to deter this sort of future conduct. So another process that we have in place for the last bullet point, where it says procedures to communicate with employees regarding workplace violence matters. So we have a system in place where we can either text all of our employees, we have all of the cell phone numbers saved, or alternatively, it can be done via email, and then let the people know you're either to evacuate, potentially to shelter in place, which would be, hey, stay in your office, lock the door, put something in front so that you're safe. Options like that. So that can be sent via text message. It can be sent via email. Notify members of the safety team. Hey, we have a workplace issue. You need to send out a text. You need to send out an email. Another just further aspect of that. So for our building where we are, there's a security company. So we have included in our plan, hey, this is the security company that you are to reach out to if there's an emergency. So tell the firm, tell the security company, and then obviously if it's something that's really, really dangerous, call 911 if you need immediate danger. So just different ways to communicate with people, having them know this is who you need to contact. So if something does happen, they know who to get in touch with. Okay, so more requirements, emergency response protocols. So how specifically are we going to respond if an emergency is brought up? Training provisions, procedures to identify and evaluate workplace violence hazards that include inspections, procedures to timely correct workplace violence hazards identified and evaluated, procedures for post-incident response and investigation, procedures that allow for plan review. So that would be part of what we were talking about earlier. So not only do we have our initial training, but then it needs to be annually. So if at some point you realize, okay, this is what our plan says, but as it actually played out, that didn't work, or we thought that something was better, we thought that maybe they should be reported in a different way or to security before, you leave in so that you can review the plan and make any changes necessary for the following year. It doesn't have to be that year, just have to add any time something comes up where you want to change the plan. That's something to also think about. And then any other procedure necessary for employee health and safety. So let's take a look. So for example, the first one where it says emergency response protocols. Just give you an example of what our specific policy says. It says alert system. We will alert employees to evacuate, shelter in place, or take other measures during an emergency by means of a text message and email announcement. If you feel threatened by a visitor, employee, or client, remove yourself from the situation without letting the person know what you are doing. Notify a member of the safety committee and send out an alert or contact on-site security. So that's kind of, we're looking on this presentation of what the law says, and then that's what the policy itself says. So it's kind of a mixture of, all right, we see the law, it's a little vague. This law is new, so it's not like we have a lot of other examples. How should it best play out, or how should it be written into a policy? And so I thought it might be helpful to just kind of give examples of the way that we put them into our policy and see if that either makes sense, if it's something similar that you have in your policies, just to make sure that, everyone's kind of on the same page, because we know under the law we have to implement it, but we actually want to do it correctly and make sure that the process is in place, that we know what's going on, and we could deal with any of these circumstances if and when, hopefully, they don't come up. All right, so employee training should familiarize employees with the plan. So that can be simple, as we mentioned. Start off by making sure that everybody has a copy of the plan, whether that's email, one physical copy, depending on if you only have a few employees, then you can print out copies for everyone. But for them to be familiar with the plan, we want to give them a copy of it. Explain how to report workplace violence incidents. Explain to employees they don't have to fear retaliation. Provide an understanding of job-specific violence hazards and prevention measures. Additional training if the plan is modified, as we spoke about. If you decide you need to modify the plan, then you should send employees the updated plan. You could even do it by when it says training, it could be as simple as calling the group together and spending however much time to go over the plan with them. Or, hey, look, we've made some changes to the plan. Here's our meeting, talk about what the changes are, see if anybody has any questions. My understanding of the term training, that would be fine doing it that way. Provided understanding. Oh, so 4, describe the purpose of the violent incident log and how to obtain related records. So as you'll see, we have a slide that explains exactly what the violent incident log is. Depending on the nature of your company, it's kind of like, so with OSHA, when there's an accident and you have to fill out the accident log, there's a certain form that you fill out, and the law will tell you, okay, what time did the accident happen? Who was involved? What happened? Is there any video? Things like that. So similar thing, because again, it's coming from OSHA. So we'll go through the specifics of exactly what the violent incidents log should say, what information we want to include in there. There's also some slides that are going to tell us, okay, so like when it says workplace violence, what are we talking about? What are some examples? How do we know if it is workplace violence or not? So there's some slides in here that'll help give us a better understanding of, does this stuff even apply? I mean, what if we just have 2 coworkers who are giving each other a little attitude? Do we need to worry about this? Does this apply? So there's some definitions in here that'll make it easier. And then finally, provide for opportunities for interactive discussions with someone knowledgeable about the plan. So the people in charge should be available to discuss, answer any questions about the plan that people may have. Because some people aren't comfortable in person in front of a big group. So if they want to ask questions, they could do that privately. So what are the record keeping requirements of the plan? So the plan must be in writing and easily accessible. That's easy. Some of the other stuff is not so easy. So records of workplace violence, hazard identification, evaluation, and correction must be created and maintained for 5 years. So the critical number here is 5. Everything is 5 years except for the training records. If you look at the 3rd bullet point, training records must be created and maintained for a minimum of 1 year. So whatever training records you have, you keep those for 1 year. The other, so like the incident log, if you look at the 4th one, violent incident logs must be maintained for a minimum of 5 years. Workplace violent incident investigations must be maintained for a minimum of 5 years. So it's important to have some sort of procedure in place to be able to maintain these logs. It can be electronic. It doesn't have to be like some of the old school things where you ask for documents and they just come in with boxes and boxes and boxes. It doesn't have to be like that. You can have a certain place in your computer system where you save them all. It's just, you need to make sure that you maintain them for the right amount of periods. And then after that, you can dispose of them or you can keep them. Luckily, when it comes to electronics, usually you're not running out of space. So if you keep them for longer, so 5 is the minimum, but you could keep them for 8, 10 if you wanted to or needed to. Okay, so the violent incident log requirements. Now that we know we have to keep this log, what should it say? So there are 4 different types of violence. So we'll go through in one of the slides a little later on. And so part of what we do is we mark it down. Okay, is this type 1, type 2, type 3, or type 4? And again, we'll look at those. A detailed description of the incident. So what happened, who was involved, things like that. classification of who committed the violence. So, for example, was it a client of ours? Was it a customer, a family member, a friend of a client or a customer, a stranger with criminal intent, a coworker, supervisor, manager, partner, spouse, parent, relative, or other perpetrator? Again, just real life examples. It really can be any of these things. I'm dealing with one case where it was an ex-boyfriend who came into the store and there was some animosity. So the employee, I don't know who started it, but the employee got upset. The ex-boyfriend got upset. Of course, the ex-boyfriend had the girlfriend there were kids, and there was a verbal altercation that would certainly trigger some of these rules. There was a attempted physical altercation. So that, family member, it really does happen to, it can be any of these types of relationships. It also needs to include a classification of the circumstances at the time of the incident. So what was the date, the time, the location of the incident? I would try to be as specific as you can. So not just, it took place in our office. It took place in the kitchen next to the break room at this time, and this is what happened. Whether the employee was completing usual job duties, so it was just totally random in the middle of a workday. Did it happen somewhere in poorly lit areas? So for example, that could be like a parking lot. On the way out, was it late after a shift? All these sorts of things are important because we want to prevent it. So, did we have a young employee walking out by herself to the parking lot after everyone had left? Things to that extent. Was somebody in a rush? What was the staffing level? Did this happen because we're supposed to have 4 people working at our store, but we had low staffing, so there was only 1, and this person was at our store by herself, and a customer came in and maybe acted in a way that the customer wouldn't have acted if there were 2 or 3 more people? Was the employee isolated or alone, unable to get help or assistance, working in a community setting, or working in an unfamiliar or new location? Now, look, these can be all different, because if every employer has to have one of these plans, then a lot of us are going to have different circumstances. So I'm in a normal office building where there's not that many customers or people coming in, but let's just say you own a cell phone store business or a restaurant. You're going to have customers coming in. You're going to have big groups, small groups of people coming in. So that's why there's so many different scenarios in terms of, the potential for what violence could look like in a different workplace. Classification of where the incident occurred. So was it in the workplace? Was it in a parking lot? Was it in another area outside of the workplace? What was the type of incident? So was it a verbal threat? Was there an attack? Was there some sort of an assault? Were there punches thrown? Was there physical altercation between people? All of those details need to be in. And then, like, what happened? What were the consequences? Did somebody have to contact law enforcement? Was it so bad that somebody had to call 911? Did we have to call security, or was it handled within our own company? All of those details should be in the violent incident log. All right, so here's some different types of violence. So the threat or use of physical force against an employee that results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, trauma, stress, regardless of whether the employee sustains an injury. An incident involving a threat or use of a firearm or other dangerous weapon, including the use of common objects as weapons, regardless of whether the injury sustains the employee sustains an injury. So you'll see in both of those, the employee doesn't actually have to sustain an injury. There could be certain conduct that is either threatened or happens, even if there's no injury. So for an example, somebody uses some sort of a weapon, a firearm, a knife, or something like that, and just waves it around at one of our employees. We have a rowdy customer, waves it around, nothing ends up happening. The employee is not injured. Customer ends up leaving. Still, under this definition, that's considered violence. It needs to be reported. It needs to go into the log. And that way we can look at, okay, what are the circumstances? What should we do? How can we prevent this? Now, what it doesn't constitute as workplace violence is lawful acts of self-defense or defense of others. So under those circumstances, it's a little bit different. But so that's how the law is going to define, to help us know, okay, is this an act of violence or not? We're gonna pull up these definitions. And then if it is an act of violence, as I mentioned, we have 4 different types. And the reason that this is important is because if there's an act of violence, then when we do the reporting log, it needs to say, okay, it was type 1, it was type 2, was it a combination? So type 1 means workplace violence committed by a person who has no legitimate business at the work site and includes violent acts by anyone who enters the workplace or approaches workers with the intent to commit a crime. So that would be, I guess in our circumstances, a complete stranger comes into our building and commits an act of violence. That would be type 1, because this person has no legitimate business need to be at our work site. Type 2 violence, workplace violence directed at employees. So this is by customers, clients, patients, students, inmates, or visitors. So that would be type 2. Some of the examples that I gave earlier, if you're the restaurant or some sort of a business with retail that deals more with customers, and the customer creates some sort of violence, then you're in category 2. 3, violence against an employee by a present or former employee, supervisor, or manager. So that's either 2 people who work together right now, or 1 person who works here and then a former employee. So the circumstance you see there is sometimes you just get these disgruntled employees who are fired and they come back to the workplace and create some sort of violence. So that would be type 3. And then type 4 is the last one. So again, workplace violence committed in the workplace by a person who does not work there, but has or is known to have a personal relationship with an employee. So that could be somebody's spouse, somebody's family member, a friend who just happens to be there. Depending on the type of business, it could be a friend who just comes and hangs out with somebody while they're working. So that would go into category 4. All right. I guess let me ask this. Does anybody have any questions so far? I will save some time at the end, but if you do have any questions, feel free to either raise your hand or put them in the chat. I think I can see them, but just wanted to let people know the best way to do it is to put it in the chat, and I'll just look. So workplace violent hazard reporting. Employees shall immediately report any observed violence, hazard, or anticipated violence or hazard. Employee report to supervisor, manager, human resources, calling the main office. So again, that's going to be business specific. If you're a bigger company, you'll have human resources. That would be a great point of contact for people to be in touch with. For us, Where do volunteers fit into the types of violence? So let's see, that's a good question. So let's see. So it wouldn't be, if you had a volunteer who's helping at your company, it wouldn't be one because they do have a legitimate reason to be there. Customers, clients, patients, students. I would say that it's probably going to fit into 3 against an employee by a present or former employee, supervisor, or manager. None of these things specifically list a volunteer, but if it's a volunteer who's coming, I guess kind of like an intern, then I would probably plug him into 3. Does not work there, but has or is known to have a personal relationship. I guess possibly 2 or 3. And then what I would do under that circumstance is I would put it in parentheses and say type 2/and/or 3 volunteer is the way that I would answer that question. That's a good question. Okay. So human resources, it can be a supervisor, it could be a manager, it could be your office manager. You pick whoever you feel the most comfortable with. Okay, so what about the investigation? So now somebody reports an act of violence and we've told them in our plan, okay, you need to report it and we're going to investigate it. So what are we going to do to actually investigate it? So the company should conduct an immediate and timely investigation. So this is one of those things where need to act quickly. Interview employees who observed the violence. So we need to figure out, you'd want to ask the person, were there any other witnesses? Who was involved? Was anyone around? That way we can make sure that we're talking to all people. Evaluate the urgency, effect on employees, the gravity of the danger. So, I mean, is this something that is like really, really, like, do we need to call the police? Is it that level, or is this just your normal workplace where we can handle it internally? Results of the investigation and corrective action will be reported to employees by the supervisor, which is similar to any sort of investigation. You're going to investigate, talk to people, and then at some point you're going to have findings that you're going to let the person know who reported it. Okay, these are our findings. This is what happened, and this is what we're going to do about it. Updating training procedures to minimize recognized hazards. So, hey, look, now we know that the parking lot has bad lighting and it's a potential hazard. So we're going to update our plan and we're going to do it differently. Okay, I see a question. What about service companies with distributed employees like plumbing companies, contractors? In other words, is there a best practice for employees who may not, let me open this. Is there a best practice for employees who may not have the same physical location every day? Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so let me think about that one. Service companies, plumbing companies, or contractors, is there a best practice for employees who may not have the same physical location every day? I guess it depends on whether you're talking about like creating a plan for people who are out and about. I guess if I'm
Yeah, that was a question that came into the chamber a few days ago from a plumbing company, actually, just with, unclear, because there's language in the template that describes a specific location. But a lot of companies have employees who won't be in the same location every day.
Oh, okay. So I guess thinking about it, if we are the plumbing company and we know that our plumbers are going to be in different locations, it would be, hey, look, if you're out and you're somewhere and something happens, you are immediately to call our main office and talk to this person. And this is how you're going to report it. And then I think you'd still follow the same things, but you'd have to give us the location of the incident would change. So unlike ours where I said, hey, it would be in the break room, it was, okay, we were at this site and this is what happens. But they're going to have a reporting mechanism where it's done via telephone. So either a call or a text, because they're not on site versus like here we're on site, easy to go to the office manager's office. I would say that would need to be clear in the policy where you are to call this number, and if this person doesn't answer, this is the cell phone number, and here's the backup person, because it's gonna have to be something immediately. So in that kind of situation, I would have multiple people who could be available for people who are kind of off site, which honestly is a lot, because you're going to have salespeople who are not just in an office all the time. They're going to be going to different places. So I think the best thing to do is be able to have a number to call or to text or to email, and to make sure that is in the plan. Let's see, update training. So let's see. Urgency of hazard will dictate the response. So do we have a medical emergency? Like I said, is it serious enough where we need to call law enforcement, or is this something that we can do internally with our own investigation? And even though we're going to act promptly, can we have our human resources or our people conduct this investigation? Employees are alerted by supervisors, managers, and other means of immediate communication. Evacuation and sheltering plan, depending on the location, identified by supervisor or other identified. So that's why I said, like ours, we have an evacuation plan that specifically says, if this happens, first evacuate the building, go down the stairs and leave. If this happens, then we're going to send out a text or email that tells people to shelter. And so lock the door in your office, put whatever in you can to block the door, and just certain different options: security personnel, human resources staff, the safety team, supervisors, and managers. So again, you pick, but make sure people know exactly who you're supposed to be calling if there's an act of violence. Consequences of the investigation: changes workplace practices, policies, discipline for involved employees creating the hazard or engaging in violence, up to and including termination. So look, that's all standard stuff. That's just like normal. So let's just say OSHA never came up with these and we didn't have to make this plan or any of these things. It's just always been that way, where if two people get into a fight at work, then you know that you're probably going to do some sort of investigation. So that doesn't change. You know, you're going to talk to the people. That doesn't change. There's going to be some sort of a finding. And then, if you find, okay, this person participated in an act of violence, then you can discipline, terminate, just like you would if this law was never created. Potential criminal investigation, I guess it depends. How bad of conduct are we looking at? Civil liability, where that comes up is, was this so bad where it needed to get reported to the police, where it's an assault or battery, which also you can have assault battery in the civil world. So just things to think about. And then what I had mentioned earlier is these links right here, that'll take you right to OSHA's publication. And then you could do exactly what we did, which is take it and tweak it to be whatever's best for your company. So I kind of wanted to fire through that. An hour goes by fast. So that way we could see if people have questions and save a couple minutes for that.
I do have one more question that came in over the phone a couple days ago. The template mentions an anonymous hotline. which isn't necessarily practical for smaller companies. Is that a hard and fast requirement, or is there a best practice for a substitute for that?
Yeah, that's not going to work. That's just honestly not going to work for a lot of people. Now for bigger employers that have 50, 100, they already have these hotlines where it says, hey, look, we understand that you may not want to report this to a supervisor for confidentiality reasons. So in the handbook, it'll say you can call this number and report it anonymously. That's not going to work for Johnny Quick, who has a couple employees. So I would say that no, not practical and not necessary. Like we don't have that for us. These are the numbers to call this person first. If they're not available, call this person. And then there's just a list. So you really want to just make sure people know who to call if these situations happen. And then if they do, to report it correctly and then keep for 5 years and all those things.
Excellent. We're coming up on time. And I don't see any other questions in the Q&A or the chat. So let me just take this opportunity, Mr. Littman, to thank you so much for doing this. You've demystified it, and I'll just remind everybody, you will get a poll at the end of the webinar where you can tell us what you thought of this one and what topics you'd like to see in the future. Again, thank you so much to David Littman and the good people at Noble Credit Union for supporting this process. And I hope you all have a really great day. Oh, also, this will be available on our website and online. So we'll send out. Mr. Littman, will you send us the slides?
I will. Yes.
Okay. Then we'll forward the slides to everybody who signed up today as well. So again, thank you very much, and we'll see you all next time.
All right. Thank you.